and since the time is too short, I will try to stick to my writing, read it from my text, and make a few remarks about religious education, but these remarks will be a bit theoretical, and try to give some case examples from my own civilization, from Islamic civilization, in other words. Education is primarily a two-way process between a teaching person and a person receiving that teaching. If this process is formal, which is given in an institution, then it has primarily two elements. One is the foundation upon which the main principles of education is built, and this constitutes the framework of the philosophy of education, which is applied in that educational system. The other is the human being, which is the subject of education that identifies the aim of education also. In that case, the aim of education is primarily to educate a person, or in general, a human being. This can be perceived as making the person knowledgeable on the one hand, and educate him or her through knowledge on the other. In the first case, education is informational, namely the individual is given some kind of knowledge, whether scientific or otherwise. But in the second case, if the person is educated, then he is transformed from a state to another state, or at least that is the way it is supposed to be. In which case, education is perceived as, at least this is the way I perceive it, transformational. So religious education is of the second type. Scientific education is of the first type. Namely, religious education is transformational and scientific education is informational. Both kinds of education are complementary to each other. This is the way we perceive, and ideally should be the case. And they never exclude one another. They should not exclude one another. To give an example from, again, Islamic civilization, a contemporary 20th century Muslim thinker, Nursi, notes that the light of conscience is religious disciplines. The light of the mind is sciences. The reconciliation of both manifests the truth. The student's skills develop further with these two types of knowledge. When they are separated, the former yields superstition, and the latter corruption and skepticism. So the purpose of education should be to integrate and unite them within a curriculum in an educational system. So, as this is the case, we may develop a new approach to education, an integrated curriculum that incorporates, but organically, religious values with scientific knowledge. The aim of Islamic education, for example, in the Muslim world should be scientific and or technological education reflected or projected from a mind that is the proper moral, conceptual context of scientific and technological knowledge. how can this be achieved? And perhaps, instead of putting the word Islam here, we can put other religions also. First of all, I need to show that Islam as a religion is capable of providing such a mental, moral, and conceptual attitude for both cultural and scientific development. We may provide an evidence from history. We must pay attention to the fact that Islam's main concern is not scientific or cultural progress within the society. And in fact, when it first came, we know from history, it never propagated such ideas to the individuals of that society. Instead, what it did is this. From the Quran, two principles can be derived for this purpose, namely for the actual purpose of Islam as a religion. Number one, internally cleanse the individual from evil inclinations through religious training known as tazkiyatun nafs. Two, to establish a community of individuals cleansed from internal evil inclinations, since such individuals will aspire for and they try to establish good order. The word muslihun, islah, again establishing a good order on earth. The statement is quite general. At two levels, the earth. One is society, good order in society, and second, in nature. They will encourage goodness and try to prevent evil as a result of this kind of training. Of course, just considering what has happened in Paris and in other places, just a few weeks ago in Ankara also, it comes to my mind that what if religious education is given radically? So this is a problem. The immediate answer that comes to my mind is that this is perhaps the same in all religions. Most religions are not interpreted radically in this way. This is the case, we know from history and from our own experiences. So these people are exceptional. Of course, it doesn't mean that, okay, since they are exceptions, let's leave them do whatever they want to. But we should concentrate and try to solve that issue separately. So I'm not talking at the moment on those radical interpretations, more orthodox interpretation of religions. But there is something striking as far as Islam is concerned for me. I will try to share this with you. It is also interesting that Islam always, when you read the Quran, you can probably see this, scorn worldly life, belittles it, in other words, and encourages in religious education to internalize a concept of life which provides eternal bliss, happiness. In other words, Islam's emphasis is, if not always, usually, on the other world, the life that is to come, which is eternal. But this worldly life is too short and transient if we just look at this emphasis and disregard the material development and the vast scientific progress in Islamic civilization, we may claim without any hesitation that a religion with this kind of an emphasis, with disparagement of worldly life, cannot produce a high civilization. But historically, this is not the case. And we know the great success of Islamic civilization in scientific and technological knowledge in the past. Maybe today we are not that good, but we know that in the past, especially if we consider the beginning of Islamic civilization as the first beginning of the 7th century, and just add 200 years later, you come to the Abbasid period, and then you will see the great philosophers and scientists who invented new sciences also, such as algebra and chemistry, optics, Alparslan, all these famous scientists. If you look in George Sarton's book, Introduction to the History of Science, the first volume is almost completely reserved for the history of Islamic science. And he says that for 300 years, Muslims dominated the scientific world, very clearly. A religion which is not emphasizing the worldly life, achieving this success within 200 years, I would say is miraculous. So how? So because internally it transferred the individuals from a state to a higher state. That is what I meant by religious education is transformational. So the purpose of religious education is to build an internal culture within the heart and mind of individuals, which is truly humane and congenial to human and moral values. Moreover, this morally progressed internal culture is based on divine consciousness, which ensures not only internalizing these values, but also their implementation in life. So each individual becomes an ideal person that knows his purpose in life, what she should do, what is his purpose, why she is here, why she is sent to this world, what to do and what not to do. Everything becomes very clear. As a result of such a religious and scientific education, they are all integrated into the personality of the individual. An individual is transformed from her existing state. So I'm not saying it's a lower state, it could be a higher state as well. But still, this kind of education, so whatever that state may be, will transfer her to a higher state, definitely. And this new state is fertile for the cultivation of culture, which leads to cultural progress. Thank you very much.